Jenny. A novel by Sigrid Undset. Translated from the Norwegian by W. Emma. Part 1. Chapter 1. As Helge Gram turned the corner into Via Condotti in the dusk, a military band came down the street, playing the Merry Widow in such a crazy whirling time that it sounded like wild bugle calls. The small dark soldiers rushed past in the cold afternoon, more like a Roman cohort intent on attacking barbarian hosts than peaceful men returning to their barracks for supper. That was perhaps the cause of their haste, Helge thought, smiling to himself. For, as he stood there watching them, his coat collar turned up for the cold, a peculiar atmosphere of history had pervaded him. But suddenly he found himself humming the same tune. "No, to the women you never get wise," and continued his way in the direction where he knew the Corso lay. He stopped at the corner and looked. So, that was the Corso, an endless stream of carriages in a crowded street, and a surging throng of people on a narrow pavement. He stood still, watching the stream run past him, and smiled at the thought that he could drift along this street every evening in the dusk among the crowds, until it became as familiar to him as the best-known thoroughfare of his own city, Christiana. He was suddenly seized with the wish to walk and walk, now and all night maybe, through all the streets of Rome, for he thought of the town as it had appeared to him a while ago, when he was looking down on it from Pincio, while the sun was setting. Clouds all over the western sky, close together like small, pale grey lambkins, and as the sun sank behind him, it painted their linings a glorious amber. Beneath the pale skies lay the city, and Helge understood that this was the real Rome, not the Rome of his imagination and his dreams, but Rome as she actually was. Everything else he had seen on his journey had disappointed him, for it was not what he imagined at home, when he had been longing to go abroad and see it all. One sight at last was far beyond his dreams, and that was Rome. A plain of housetops lay beneath him in the valley, the roofs of houses new and old, of houses high and low. It looked as if they had been built anywhere and at any time, and of a size to suit the needs of the moment. In a few places only a space could be seen between the mass of housetops, as of streets. All this world of reckless lines, crossing each other in 1,000 hard angles, was lying inert and quiet under the pale skies, while the setting sun touched the borders of the clouds with a tinge of light. It was dreaming under a thin veil of white mist, which no busy pillar of smoke dared penetrate, for no factory chimney could be seen, and no smoke came from a single one of the funny little chimney pipes protruding from the houses. The round, old, rust-brown tiles were covered by greyish moss and grass, and small plants with yellow blossoms grew in the gutters. Along the border of the terraces, the aloes stood immovably still in their tubs, and creepers hung in dead cascades from the cornices. Here and there, the upper part of a high house rose above its neighbour, its dark, hollow windows staring at one out of a grey or reddish-yellow wall, or sleeping behind closed shutters. Loggias stood out of the mist, looking like parts of an old watchtower, and small summer houses of wood or corrugated iron were erected on the roofs. Above it all, masses of church cupolas were floating. The huge grey one, far on the other side of what Helge supposed to be the river, was that of St. Peter. Beyond the valley, where the roofs covered the silent city, it well deserved the epithet eternal tonight, A low hill stretched its longish back toward the skies, carrying on the far-away ridge an avenue of pines, the foliage of which formed one large mass above the row of slender trunks. And behind the dome of St. Peter, the eye was arrested by another hill with villas built among pines and cypresses, probably Monte Mario. The dark leaves of the holly formed a roof over his head, and behind him a fountain made a curiously living sound as the water splashed against the stone border before flowing into the basin beneath it. Helge whispered to the city of his dreams, whose streets his feet had not yet touched, whose houses did not harbour one single soul he knew. Rome! Rome! Eternal Rome! He was suddenly struck by his own loneliness and startled at his emotion, though he knew that there was nobody to witness it, and turning round, he hurried down the Spanish stairs. And now, when he stood at the corner of Condotti and Corso, he experienced a quaint and yet pleasant anxiety at the thought of mixing with those hustling crowds, and finding his way in the strange city, to wander through it as far as Piazza San Pietro. As he was crossing the street, two young girls passed him. They looked like Norwegians, he thought, with a slight thrill of pleasure. One of them was very fair, and wore light-coloured furs. It was a joy to him even to read the names of the streets, carved in clear Latin type on white marble slabs set in the corners of the houses. The street he took ran into an open space near a bridge, on which 2 rows of lanterns burned with a sickly greenish flame in the pale light pouring down from the restless sky. A low parapet of stone ran along the waterline, bordered by a row of trees with faded leaves and trunks, dropping their bark in big white flakes. On the opposite side of the river, the street lamps were burning among the trees, and the houses stood out black against the sky. But on this side, the twilight still flickered on the window panes. The sky was almost clear now, and hung transparent and greenish blue over the hill with the pine avenue, with here and there a few reddish, threatening, slowly moving clouds. He stopped on the bridge and looked down into the Tiber. How dull the water was! It flowed on rapidly, reflecting the colours of the evening skies, sweeping twigs and gravel and bits of wood on its way between the stone walls. A small staircase on the side of the bridge led down to the water's edge. Helge thought how easy it would be to walk down the steps one night when one was tired of everything. Had anyone ever done so, he wondered? He asked a policeman the way to St. Peter's Cathedral in German. The man answered him first in French and then Italian, and when Helge repeatedly shook his head, he spoke French again, pointing up the river. Helge turned in that direction. A huge, dark stone building stood out against the sky, a low, round tower with a jagged crest, and the jet-black silhouette of an angel on top. He recognized the lines of the St. Angelo fort, and went close up to it. It was still light enough for the statues by the bridge to show up yellow in the twilight. The red skies were still mirrored in the flowing waters of the Tiber, but the street lamps had gained power and threw out paths of light across the river. Beyond the San Angelo bridge, the electric tramcars with illuminated windows rolled over the new iron bridge, throwing white sparks from the connecting wires. Helge took off his hat to a man. "San Pietro, favorisca?" The man pointed with his finger and said something Helge did not understand. He turned into a dark and narrow street, which, with a sensation of joy, he almost thought he recognized, for it was exactly like the Italian street of his imagination. Shop after shop full of curios. He gazed into the poorly lit windows. Most of the things were rubbish. Those dirty strips of coarse white lace hanging on a string were surely not Italian handiwork. There were bits of pottery exhibited in dusty box lids, and small bronze figures of a poisonous green, old and new brass candlesticks, and brooches with heaps of stones that looked far from genuine. Yet he was seized by a senseless wish to go in and buy something, to inquire, to bargain, and to purchase. Almost before he knew it, he had entered a small stuffy shop filled with all sorts of things. There were church lamps hanging from the ceiling, bits of silk with gold flowers on red and green and white ground, and broken pieces of furniture. Behind the counter, a youth with a dark complexion and a bluish, unshaven chin was reading. He talked and asked questions, while Helge pointed at various articles. Quanto? The only thing he understood was that the prices were excessive, but one ought not to buy until one knew the language well enough to bargain with them. Several pieces of china were standing on a shelf, rococo figures and vases with sprays of roses, which looked quite modern. Helge seized one at random and placed it on the counter. Quanto? Sette, said the youth, and spread out 7 fingers. Quattro, said Helge, holding out 4 fingers in a new brown glove, and felt quite pleased with himself at this leap into the foreign language. He did not understand one word of the man's arguments, but each time he finished talking, Helge raised his 4 fingers and repeated his quattro, adding with a superior air, Non antica. But the shopkeeper protested, Si, antica. Quattro, said Helge again. The man had now only 5 fingers in the air, and turned towards the door. The man called him back, accepting, and Helge, feeling highly pleased with himself, went out with his purchase, wrapped up in pink tissue paper. He perceived the dark mass of the church at the bottom of the street outlined against the sky, and walked on. He hurried across the first part of the piazza with its lighted shop windows, and passing trams towards the 2 semicircular arcades, which laid a pair of rounded arms, as it were, about one part of the place, drawing it into the quiet and darkness of the massive church, with its broad steps extending in a shell-like formation far out on the piazza. The dome of the church and the row of saints along the roof of the arcades stood out black against the faint light of the sky. The trees and houses on the hill at the back seemed to be heaped one on top of the other in an irregular fashion. The street lamps were powerless here. The darkness streamed forth between the pillars and spread over the steps from the open portico of the church. He went slowly up the steps close to the church and looked through the iron doors. Then he went back again to the obelisk in the middle of the piazza and stood there gazing at the dark building. He bent his head back and followed with his eyes the slender needle of stone that pointed straight into the evening sky, where the last clouds had descended on the roofs of that part of the town whence he had come, and the first radiant sparks of the stars pierced the gathering darkness. Again his ears caught the sound of water emptying into a stone cistern, and the soft ripple of the overflow from one receptacle into another into the basin. He approached one of the fountains and watched the thick white jet, driven upwards, as it were, in angry defiance, and looking black against the clear atmosphere, to break high in the air and sink back into the darkness, where the water gleamed white again. He kept staring at it until a gust of wind took hold of the jet and bent it towards him, raining icy drops on his face. But he remained where he was, listening and staring. Then he walked a few steps, stood still, and walked again, but very slowly, listening to an inner voice. It was true, then, really true, that he was here, far, far away from everything he had longed so intensely to leave. and he walked still more slowly, furtively, like one who has escaped from prison. At the corner of the street there was a restaurant. He made for it, and on his way found a tobacco shop, where he bought some cigarettes, picture cards and stamps. Waiting for his steak, he drank big gulps of claret, while he wrote to his parents, to his father. "I have been thinking of you very often today." It was true enough. And to his mother, "I have already got a small present for you, the first thing I bought here in Rome." Poor mother! How was she? He had often been impatient with her these last years. He unpacked the thing and had a look at it. It was probably meant for a scent bottle. He added a few words to his mother's card that he managed the language all right, and that to bargain in the shops was an easy matter. The food was good, but expensive. Never mind, once he was more at home here, he would soon learn how to live cheaply. Satisfied and exhilarated by the wine, he started to walk in a new direction, past long, low, dilapidated houses, through an archway onto a bridge. A man in a barrier hut stopped him and made him understand that he had to pay a soldo. On the other side of the bridge was a large, dark church with a dome. He got into a labyrinth of dark, narrow bits of streets. In the mysterious gloom he surmised the existence of old palaces with projecting cornices and lattice windows side by side with miserable hovels, and small church fronts in between the rows of houses. There were no pavements, and he stepped into refuse that lay rotting in the gutter. Outside the narrow doors of the lighted taverns, and under the few street lamps, he had a vague glimpse of human forms. He was half delighted, half afraid, boyishly excited, and wondering at the same time how he was to get out of this maze and find the way to his hotel at the ends of the earth. Take a cab, he supposed. He passed down another narrow, almost empty street. A small strip of clear sky was visible between the high houses, with their frameless windows looking like black holes cut in the wall. On the uneven stone bridge, dust, straw, and bits of paper were tossed about by a light gust of wind. Two women, walking behind him, passed him close under a lamp. He gave a start. They were the ones he had noticed that afternoon in the Corso and believed to be Norwegian. He recognized the light furs of the taller one. Suddenly he felt an impulse to try an adventure, to ask them the way, so as to hear if they were Norwegian, or Scandinavian at any rate, for they were certainly foreigners. With slightly beating heart he started to walk after them. The two girls stopped outside a shop, which was closed, and then walked on. Helge wondered if he should say please, or bitte, or scusi, or if he should blurt out at once, unskilled. It would be funny if they were Norwegians. The girls turned a corner. Helge was close upon them, screwing up courage to address them. The smaller one turned round angrily and said something in Italian in a low voice. He felt disappointed and was going to vanish after an apology when the tall one said in Norwegian, "You should not speak to them, Seska. It is much better to pretend not to notice." "I cannot bear that cursed Italian rabble. I never will leave a woman alone," said the other. "I beg your pardon," said Helge, and the two girls stopped, turning round quickly. "I hope you will excuse me," he muttered, colouring, and angrily conscious of it, blushed still deeper. "I only arrived from Florence today, and have lost my way in these winding streets. I thought you were Norwegian, or at any rate Scandinavian, and I cannot manage the Italian language. Would you be kind enough to tell me where to find a car? My name is Gram," he added, raising his hat again. "Where do you live?" asked the taller girl. "At a place called the Albergo Torino, close to the station," he explained. "He should take the Trastevere tram at San Carlo a Centenari," said the other. "No, better take a number 1 at the new Corso." "But those cars don't go to the Termini," answered the little one. "Yes, they do. Those that have San Pietro Stazione Termini written on them," she explained to Helge. "Oh, that one! It runs past Capo di Casa and Ludovisi, and an awful long way about first. It will take an hour at least to the station with that one." "No, dear, it goes direct, straight along Via Nazionale." "It does not," insisted the other. "It goes to the Lateran first." The taller girl turned to Helge. "The first turning right will take you into a sort of market. From there you can go along the Cancellaria on your left to the new Corso. If I remember rightly, the tram stops at the Cancellaria. Somewhere near it, anyway, and you will see the sign. But be sure to take the tram marked San Pietro Stazione Termini number 1. Helge stood somewhat crestfallen, listening to the foreign names which the girls used with such easy familiarity. And, shaking his head, he said, "I am afraid I shall never be able to find it. Perhaps I had better walk till I find a cab." "We might go with you to the stop," said the tall one. The little one whispered peevishly something in Italian, but the other answered her decisively. Helge felt still more confused at these asides, which he did not understand. "Thank you, but please do not trouble. I am sure to find my way home, somehow or other." "It is no trouble," said the tall one, starting to walk. "It is on our way." "It is very kind of you. I suppose it is rather difficult to find one's way about in Rome, is it not?" he said, by way of conversation, "especially when it is dark." "Oh, no. You will soon get used to it." "I only arrived here today. I came from Florence this morning by train." The smaller one said something in an undertone in Italian. The tall one asked, "Was it very cold in Florence?" "Yes, bitterly cold. It is milder here, isn't it? I wrote my mother anyway yesterday to send my winter coat." "Well, it is cold enough here too, sometimes." "Did you like Florence? How long were you there?" "A fortnight. I think I shall like Rome better than Florence." The other young girl smiled. She had been muttering to herself in Italian all the time, but the tall one went on in a pleasant, quiet voice. "I don't believe there is any town one could love as much as Rome." "Is your friend Italian?" asked Helge. "No. Miss Jarman is Norwegian. We speak Italian because I want to learn, and she is very good at it. My name is Wing," she added. "That is the Cancellaria." She pointed towards a big, dark palace. "Is the courtyard as fine as it is reported to be?" "Yes, it is very fine. I will show you which car." While they stood waiting, 2 men came across the street. "Hello, you here?" exclaimed one of them. "Good evening," said the other. "What luck? We can go together. Have you been to look at the corals?" "It was closed," said Miss Jarman sulkily. "We have met a fellow countryman and promised to show him the right tram," Miss Wing explained, introducing Mr. Gram, Mr. Hagen, artist, and Mr. Arlen, sculptor. "I don't know if you remember me, Mr. Hagen. My name is Gram. We met 3 years ago on the Maisuseta." "Oh, yes, certainly. And so, you are in Rome." Arlen and Miss Jarman had stood talking to one another in whispers. the girl came up to her friend and said, "I am going home now, Jenny. I am not in the mood for Frascati tonight." "But, my dear, you suggested it yourself." "Well, not Frascati anyway. Ugh, sit there and mope with 30 old Danish ladies of every possible age and sex. We can go somewhere else. But there is your train coming, Mr. Gram." "1,000 thanks for your help. Shall I see you again at the Scandinavian Club, perhaps?" The tram stopped in front of them. Miss Wing said, "I don't know. Perhaps you would like to come with us now. We were going to have a glass of wine somewhere and hear some music." "Thank you." Helge hesitated, looking round at the others, a little embarrassed. "I should be very pleased, but—" And turning with confidence to Miss Wing of the fair face and the kind voice, he said with an awkward smile, "You all know one another. Perhaps you would rather not have a stranger with you." "Indeed, no," she said, smiling. "It would be very nice. Oh, and look, your tram's gone now. You know Hagen already, and you know us. We'll see you get home all right, so if you are not tired, let us go." "Tired? Not a bit. I should love to come," said Helge eagerly. The other three began to propose different cafes. Helge knew none of the names. His father had not mentioned them. Miss Jarman rejected them all. "Very well. Then let us go down to St. Agostino. You know the one, Gunnar, where they give you that first-rate claret." And Jenny began to walk on, accompanied by Hagen. "There is no music," retorted Miss Jarman. "Oh, yes, the man with the squint and the other fellow are there almost every night. Don't let us waste time." Helge followed with Miss Jarman and the Swedish sculptor. "Have you been long in Rome, Mr. Gram?" "No, I came this morning from Florence." Miss Jarman laughed. Helge felt rather snubbed. He ought perhaps to have said he was tired and gone home. On their way down through the dark, narrow streets, Miss Jarman talked all the time to the sculptor, and scarcely answered when he tried to speak to her. But before he had made up his mind, he saw the other couple vanish through a dark door down the street.